Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar featuring NCBA CLUSA Associate Member Stratus Wealth Advisors. So today we're going to be learning about business continuity and succession planning strategies and how that can help you and your members stay resilient, even in the face of crisis. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Liz, and I'm going to run through just a few housekeeping items before we get started here. So first things first, today's webinar will run for 60 minutes, and just so you guys know, your audio will be muted for the duration of that time. However, we definitely do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the chat box, which you can find on your GoToWebinar control panel. And throughout this session, we'll be monitoring that conversation, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those questions as possible during our live Q&A session. So today's webinar is going to start out with a video presentation led by Sam Brownell. He's the owner and founder of Stratus Wealth Advisors, and Andrea Dunathan. She's the principal at Dunathan Consulting. And after this video, we are thrilled to have both Sam and Andrea here with us this afternoon for a live Q&A discussion. So please stick around for that. And as you have questions during the video presentation, don't hesitate to type them into the chat box. We'll be collecting them again, and we'll get to them toward the end of the presentation. And with that said, I am going to turn it over to Sam and Andrea for a quick introduction, and then we'll get started. Sam?
Yes, thank you, Liz. And good afternoon, everybody. We are excited to be here. We're excited that you decided to join us this afternoon, and we can replay the session if you missed it from the Impact Conference. One thing we wanted to let you know about is there are 4 handouts for you that you can download. Feel free to use them. They're complimentary from us, and we're really looking forward to taking your questions. And as Liz said, I'm Sam Brownell. I am the founder and owner of Stratus Wealth Advisors, and we provide business valuation, succession planning services to all independent business owners, and in particular to business owners who are members of purchasing co-ops. So with that, I'll pass it to Andrea.
Thanks, Sam. My name is Andrea Dunathan. I'm with Dunathan Consulting. Again, I want to repeat what Sam and Liz said. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here. I serve small businesses as a consultant, helping streamline operations so that everything's running like clockwork. The business owner is free to grow the business and free to really think about the vision and where to take the business. And the staff are empowered, engaged, and really getting the work done. So if you have any operational issues, I'm the person to talk to. I want to reiterate one thing that Liz said. We're covering a lot of topics today. So if you think of a question during one topic, please do type it in the chat. We'll be moving on to the next topic, and it would be very easy to forget your questions. So go ahead and submit them, and we're very excited to be here live at the end as well and talk to you about your questions. So with that, we'll pass it back to Liz, or to Sam if you have any other comments.
No, that's great. We'll pass it back to Liz for the recording, and we'll see you guys for a live Q&A afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Sam and Andrea.
Okay, welcome. We're very glad to have everybody here today for a topic that is really top of mind right now, which is business continuity planning. And we want to really help you be able to help your members come out of this COVID pandemic much stronger, because stronger members mean stronger purchasing co-ops. So thank you very much for having us to NCBA, and thank you to all the purchasing co-ops who are here, any of your members, and anybody else who's a member or friend of NCBA. So with that, let's dive into introductions, and we'll get into our presentation. My name is Sam Brownell. I am the owner and founder of Stratus Wealth Advisors. We are a firm that works with independent business owners to help them determine and maximize the value of their business as part of a succession plan, so that we can help these folks both personally and professionally succeed, and we can help coordinate with their other service providers. So I'm really happy to be here today with my friend and colleague, Andrea, whose services are very complementary and will be a big help to us during this presentation. So I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Thanks, Sam. I too am very excited to be here today. I have a special spot in my heart for co-ops. I used to be on the board of a natural food co-op many years ago, and really espouse that model. So I'm really happy to be here. As I said, thank you, Sam, for inviting me. And I am a small business consultant. I focus on business operations. The services I offer to small and medium businesses are around improving operations for multiple reasons. Perhaps the company is growing very quickly and needs to increase its capacity to handle more customers. Or perhaps, as Sam said, the owner is thinking about doing some succession planning, thinking about an eventual sale of the business, in which case often improving the operations of the business can really help increase the market value of that business. So Sam work very closely in that area together. So thanks again for having me, and let's dive in.
Great. So thank you, Andrea. So I think what we'll start with is a short story that will hopefully give everyone on this webinar an idea of the importance of business continuity planning. So a number of years ago, I was approached by an independent pharmacy, a community pharmacy, who was having some issues because it was owned by a husband and wife who were trying to transition the business to their daughter. Now, a number of years before that, the daughter had gotten married and her husband had also become an employee, but he was not included in the transition plan. He was not going to get any ownership. And so, as you may have guessed from this cartoon, what happened was a divorce. The daughter and her husband got divorced and there was no plan in place. The legal documents didn't address this either. And so we ended up in a situation where the husband's family had sued this community pharmacy and ended up with a minority ownership stake in the business. And this is a big problem because now you've got factions that don't really like each other, that aren't seeing eye to eye, and you're having to send profits to somebody who's not even really part of the family anymore. And this is why the planning is important. You have to do this stuff ahead of time. You have to do this in peacetime so that you know what to do when things start to get a little bit more volatile and a little bit more stressful. So let's jump into the way that Andrea and I like to define business continuity planning. So there are kind of 4 dimensions to look at, and they can all work together here. There are external risks, things like natural disasters, a pandemic. There are internal risks, things that have to deal with cash flow issues, inventory management, supply chain disruptions. Then we can look at these from another lens, which is this a trigger event? Is this something that is one time or maybe over a short period of time, but it's a defined continuity? Death of an owner comes to mind. Divorce would be another one. Or is this what we like to call a slow motion risk? Something that is not going to happen overnight or even over the course of a month, but if it's not being monitored, it can really degrade the value of the business and the way the operations are efficient or not efficient. So these are all things we need to think about, because ultimately what we want to do for our members is plan for that eventual continuity between owners. So the short-term planning leads into the intermediate, which leads into the long-term. And so then we can continue to have a member as part of our purchasing co-op, and that business can continue to flourish regardless of who is running it. So let me pass it to Andrea now so she can talk a bit more about our definition of business continuity planning.
Thanks, Sam. You know, Sam just talked about the multiple kinds of risks that this type of plan can address, and that is an extremely important component of doing this kind of plan. We also want to mention that this kind of plan strengthens the business in other ways. So think of these as side benefits of putting the time and energy into doing this kind of plan. For example, if we assess your operations and we take a look at the value of your business, we'll certainly notice red flags, things that need to be improved, but we'll also notice growth opportunities that maybe the owner had not noticed or had not thought were such a great opportunity. And we can point out places where that business could really grow based on our analysis. Likewise, getting yourself really organized to handle a particular crisis. Let's say you have an emergency plan for handling a tornado hitting your warehouse. So you've got all the information related to that organized well, so that in a crisis you can put your hands on it. Well, now the information's organized well, right? That can only help your business to have its processes and information and the communications between different staff members discussed and planned for. So that really can strengthen your business. Our goal really is to create a long-term sustainable and stable business that can survive any kind of crisis or transition and continue to be a strong community business. That's the best for everybody. So our goal here today is really to convince you to go ahead and make a plan. If you take nothing else away, think about making a plan. So you may say, okay, Andrea, but we're already very busy. We're running a business. There's a lot going on. How do we make time for this? And I would say, look, it's part of your other planning processes that you're already doing. If you're doing an annual strategic plan, if you're doing budgets, if you even do quarterly work plans, anything like that, you can build this kind of planning into those processes. You're already having times when you sit down with your staff and have meetings. Make this a component of that. It actually helps to do it that way, because that way your plan is actually a live part of your ongoing planning, and it doesn't become stale or old or out of date. So we really recommend incorporating it into your current planning process, so it's not a huge burden on you to do a separate process. So with that, let me pass it over to Sam, and he's going to walk us through kind of a roadmap of what it looks like to put together a plan like this.
Yeah, perfect, Andrea. And that's a great transition for us, because we do want you as the purchasing co-ops to be able to take this information to your members and say, we're not adding another to-do. And so what we thought we'd do today was walk through our roadmap so that you had an idea of the way that we looked at creating these business continuity plans. And priority number one, and it's true for a business at any time, but especially in a time of crisis, is liquidity. So let's jump into a template here that could be very useful for your members. We all know that what is the lifeblood of a business is cash flow. And what we need to do, either in good times or in bad times, is make sure that as we look down the road, there aren't any problems coming up. But it's especially true now. And when we work with business owners, we think that they should be looking at a cash flow analysis every 1 to 2 months, because the environment's changing very fast. And this is not a challenging thing to do. It can be tucked in as part of the budgeting. It can be tucked in as part of your audit or your review with an accountant. But take a look at your revenues and let's project those out. And especially now, let's be conservative. Just because things are opening up doesn't mean that your revenue is all of a sudden going to bounce back to where it was in January or February. On the flip side, let's look at those expenses. And here we're caring about cash only. Things like depreciation, write-offs, things that are tax related, let's not think about those. These are ongoing cash outlays. And here we want to be more aggressive. We want to make sure that we are not just saying, oh, just because our business is operating at 50% means that that expense is going to be 50%, because there are lots of additional expenses that folks are incurring right now, from PPE to cleaning to signage. And these things are going to affect the cash flow down the line. So remember, conservative on the revenue projections, aggressive on the expenses, and then we can see when we may run into a cash flow crunch. And this is something that we're going to provide to everybody here to use with your members. You're welcome to come by if you haven't and visit us at our booth and ask some questions about this, because these templates, they're easy, but they can be very powerful as we look down the line. So let's now jump into really the meat of the presentation, which is going to be this priority 2, which is identifying and mitigating these risks. And so I'm going to pass it to Andrea now so she can talk about the emergency action plan.
Thanks, Sam. So as Sam said, these emergency action plans, these are really helpful to have a plan for when one of these trigger events occurs. So this is something like the tornado hitting your warehouse, somebody dying, or suddenly becoming sick, right? It doesn't have to be death. Suddenly someone is out when you expected them to be in and working. Any kind of crisis like that where it's triggered by a particular event. The basic process here is we figure out what key operations are that cannot stop in the case of this sudden event happening, right? Whatever has to keep running in the days and weeks following that sudden event, we want to identify those crucial operations. Then we're going to look at what possible risks are there, what kind of events might occur, and how they might affect those really key operations that we're talking about. Then you're going to work with your team and say, okay, so we've identified these risks. We know which the key operations are. How could we minimize the impact of those risks? And you're going to work through that with your team, come up with an emergency action plan, and write it down. So let's go through that in a little bit more detail. When we talk about identifying key operations, remember that it's not just the immediate things that you do day to day. Those things are very important. You want to identify them. You can look at customer facing, you can look at internal, but also remember to look at the things that happen only every so often. For example, maybe you have a quarterly process where you place a whole lot of orders with vendors for the upcoming quarter. Well, if the person who handles that whole effort suddenly falls sick right before that effort was due to occur, that's a problem, right? So even though that event only occurs every quarter, you still want to include it in one of your key operations lists. One way to identify these key operations is to look at through your org chart, look at the duties of each position, and think about what those key duties are, and that might point you to some of these key activities that your business does. So once you've got that under, got a nice list there of the things that have to keep running in case of an emergency, we're going to take a look at the types of emergencies that might affect your business. You can't just take one list of risks and use it for every business, because every business is different and there's probably thousands of possible risks out there. So in your area, maybe it's a tornado versus a hurricane, maybe it's an HVAC failure because your building has that trouble often, who knows, everybody's got supply chain issues. So I've listed here 4 major types of risk areas that might trigger some thoughts for you. You can go to ready.gov and see lists of a ton of them to, again, stimulate your thinking on that. And then I don't want you to forget organizational changes. Sam referred to this earlier, but there's some changes in the organization that people don't necessarily like to talk about. This can be a little uncomfortable. Potential death of a key staff member or one of the partners, divorce. If there's 2 partners owning a business, neither of them wants to say to the other, yeah, but what if you got divorced, right? That's not a comfortable conversation, but it is something you should discuss. So this may be an area where it's helpful to call in a succession planner like Sam, who can be that third party and can ask those questions that are otherwise maybe a little bit difficult to bring up. And he can also look at the structure of your business and notice risks that you might not be aware of in terms of the legal structure, what's been documented, what might happen, because he's done this for so many businesses, it's fresh in his mind. So once you've gone through these risks, you're going to make a list of risks and it's going to be overwhelming, right? You think, oh, I can't do planning for all of these. We know that. We are going to prioritize these and you're going to pick the most crucial ones to plan for. You're not going to plan for them all. So let's take a look at that. What I suggest you use is something I call a risk matrix. This is actually pretty simple. Along the bottom there, it's how likely is this risk to actually happen? And then going up and down, it's how bad would it be if it did happen, right? How badly would it affect your business? So you just put things in those 4 quadrants, low versus high. You don't have to be really picky, medium, low, just low versus high is fine. And then take a look. The things that are in the upper right, they're very likely to happen and very likely to have a very big negative impact on your business. You're going to make plans for those, right? Because they're likely and bad. So that's your first tier, your first priority. The second area is the top left. These are not so likely to occur, but the potential impact is still very high. And that's the kind of thing you do still want to plan for, even though they're less likely, because these are things that could take out your business. People don't plan for them because they seem unlikely, but the potential impact is so big. So make those your second tier and do make plans for those. The third tier is the bottom right, and this is more of a judgment call. So look at each risk. They're likely to occur, but it's fairly low impact to your business. Some of these you can just ignore. You don't need to have a plan for. Some of these over time slowly erode your customer confidence or your staff morale, or they're costing money each time they occur and it's slowly sucking away your cash flow. So those you're going to have to make a judgment call. Is it worth addressing them or not? If it is, make a plan. If it's not, you can ignore them. On the bottom left, you're going to leave those alone. There's not really time to handle every single risk. And if it's unlikely and low impact, it's not worth putting a whole lot of effort into those. So this is how you prioritize your risks. And then we're going to take those risks and next step will be to come up with plans for them. So before we go into that, I want to pass it to Sam to talk about some examples.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And Andrea brought up a great point, and that's the brainstorming. This is where you can spend some time working on your business and having your team give you some input into how different scenarios would affect the operations. And we've listed 3 here that are very top of mind for lots of folks. Number 1 is somebody getting sick. If you have a key employee, a store manager, let's say, that even if they don't get COVID, if they have been exposed and have to quarantine, how are you going to deal with that? Who's setting shift hours? Who's dealing with issues that come up with customers? These are things to think through ahead of time. A lot of hurricanes have happened on the Gulf Coast. What is going on if a storm knocks out power? Do you have that backup generator? Are you able to get supplies in, and are you able to get goods to customers? And finally, regardless of what industry your members are in, everybody has experienced some type of supply chain disruption. But sit down with that team, figure out what types of supply chain disruption are going to be the most impactful in a negative way on your business. Do you carry a certain special type of inventory that you're going to have to make sure that you have because that's what customers want, versus the more general stuff that, hey, they may not need exactly now, or it may not be mission critical when it does come up. So think through these, use and encourage your members to use their teams. And if they reach out to you, one of the best things you can do is start by asking questions. What are some of the biggest risks to your business? What are you concerned about right now? Because the more information you can get, the more help that you can give. And so we're going to go back to Andrea here to talk a little bit about the mitigation of these risks now that we've thought and brainstormed with our team about the impacts.
Thanks, Sam. This is the point where we say, okay, team, we know that these are the risks that are going to impact our key operations. How do we handle them? And there's kind of 3 levels of handling a risk, right? If the risk is, for example, flooding, and the impact of that risk is damaging your goods in the warehouse that's next to the river that's flooding, in a perfect world, you would prevent the risk, right? So you ask that first. Can we prevent this risk from happening? Can we prevent the flooding? Well, in the case of a river flooding, probably not. It's kind of nature, right? Mother Nature. So let's move on to the second best, which would be avoiding the impact, avoiding the damaged goods. So maybe you could sandbag the warehouse and keep it from getting flooded, or maybe you could put the goods up on shelves inside the warehouse and prevent them from being damaged, even though the warehouse flooded. So if you can avoid that impact, of course, that's better. If you can't avoid the impact, then could you lessen it in some way? For example, during flood season, could you move goods to a different warehouse? Could you reduce your inventory at that time of year so at least the damage would be minimized? And, at worst, could you buy flood insurance or some kind of insurance to cover the value of the goods so that at least you could restock relatively quickly? So that's a good order to go in for those when you're trying to figure out how to handle a risk. So what do you do with that? You've sat with your team, you've figured out what the plan is to try to mitigate the risk, write it down. And this doesn't have to be fancy. I've provided a template so you can download it or come by our booth and talk about it. It's just a very straightforward thing. You've made all these decisions, you've made plans of action. In the middle of a crisis, it's hard to remember what we decided 3 months ago that we were going to do in the middle of that crisis, right? So have it as an easy reference, right? Each of these crises, make sure that there's an easy reference plan that people can grab and say, I know what to do because we practiced this, we talked about it, we wrote it down. I have this reference sheet here. I see that Sally's going to call Joe. I see that I'm supposed to go call the warehouse. I see, right? We know what the steps are. We've decided in advance. Making those advanced decisions and writing them down is one of the most important things you can do, because in the middle of a crisis, no one's thinking clearly, right? Panic sets in. So to prevent panic, you write this down, you practice it, you train your staff, you talk through it, you make sure it's fresh in their mind. And then when it happens, they stay calm and they execute. They're not having to make important decisions under that strain of the sudden crisis. So with that, hopefully that'll help you understand how to develop emergency action plans, which risks are most important to develop the plans for, so you can prioritize, and you can slowly work on them as part of your regular course of business. Let me pass it back to Sam to kind of revisit where we are in our roadmap.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So that was a really good setup, because you want to get those trigger events and get them outlined and have a plan, because then we move into these more slow motion operational risks that are a little bit more challenging because there's not one defining event. And so we're going to walk through how to look at these. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about the audit those operations. So what we want to do is we want to start thinking about what are the key metrics for our business and how are we going to monitor them? Because cash flow is always important, especially now, as we talked about. That's where that cash flow analysis template can really come into play, because you can sit down and start doing some projections into the future and seeing what's going to happen. Are we going to run into some problems down the line? Reviewing key metrics. Everybody here, your members, there's a trade association out there that probably has a list of average metrics for that industry. This is where things like inventory turnover. Can your current assets cover your current liabilities? What is the product mix? These are things that are important for your members to keep an eye on. And this is where people like Andrea can be very, very useful, because they're going to get down there, roll up their sleeves, get into the business and figure out what is going on and how can we make this better by prioritizing what is important to the business owners. So don't be afraid to think about using outside help, because an objective opinion makes a big difference in these cases. So let's now get into an example. So a few years ago, I was called in to do a valuation of a paint and decorating store. And the issue they were running into as we got down into the analysis was they swore up and down that they were selling to high-end customers, folks who were doing jobs at luxury apartments or building mansions. Well, it turned out that by talking to the staff on the floor, that really mainly their customers were do-it-yourselfers or small contractors. And so here we've already found a disconnect between who they think they're selling to and who's actually buying their products. And this has real impact on the way that the business is run. And this is where, again, we encourage you, as your members call, to ask questions. Use the questions that we've provided in this slideshow to prompt good discussion. Who are you selling to? What are your margins like? How do those compare to your competitors? And so one of the things that you can provide is this next template. So this is something that we use quite often with business owners. And again, just like the cash flow analysis, just like that risk mitigation chart, it's going to be things that are easy. We're not asking these folks to come up and do hours and hours of analysis, but these are things that they have to be able to do and tuck them in as part of their ongoing operations. So in this case, what do? We look at this chart and say, everybody in the organization, take this and independently fill out, what are our activities and services? Then let's rate these on a scale of 1 to 10 in 3 categories. How teachable are these? Is this something that if Andrea or I walked into your business or your member's business, we would be able to say, okay, we can learn that pretty quickly? Or is this something that's just particular to somebody's mind, and if something were to happen to them, that knowledge would be lost and would have to be relearned again? So making things teachable, more turnkey, makes the business more efficient and more valuable. Next, differentiator. Is this activity or service going to provide something different to the customer? And this doesn't necessarily mean a different product altogether. This could be, and in this example, the bottom line. This independent hardware store specializes in barbecue equipment repair. Lots of hardware stores, in fact, all of them sell barbecue equipment, but can they repair it when it comes through the door? That's going to be a differentiator that one of your members may have that sets them apart, which then drives that third category, which is loyalty. Does this create loyalty? Ultimately, what we want is repeat customers. Repeat customers make our business more efficient. They allow us to grow because our customers can be some of our best marketers. So going through something like this, having your members go through it, talk them through this chart can really help to pinpoint the areas where they're strong and also the areas where they're weak, because especially during times of crisis, it's important to prune those operations. And there may be things that we were carrying this product or we were trying to provide this service and it just really hasn't taken off. Well, maybe now is a great time to cut that and divert those resources elsewhere. So let's now talk a little bit higher level now about this planning. Really, really important for your members. Strategic thinking is what we're talking about when we're in this section about slow motion risks. It's really important to not be in the weeds constantly. If you are the owner, if you're the leadership team, yes, take a turn at the cash register to see what's going on. But every week, you should be spending a couple hours thinking strategically. What is the vision of the business? Who are we selling to? What markets do we want to expand into? And these are things, again, that working with somebody like Andrea, who can pick out these areas and help prioritize and then come up with systems to implement them, is really, really important. And so that's what we're going to get into now, is talking a little bit more about some of these metrics that you can use with your members. So we've said it a lot. It's beating a dead horse, but I'm going to say it again. Ask questions. Ask questions. It's really, really important because it hits at the heart of the way a business is run. And one of the things that both Andrea and I are really big on is looking at the trajectory of these metrics over time, because that will tell you where your business is headed. Is our cash going down? Are we now able to cover less? Are we going to have trouble making that payment on that loan? How do some of these metrics, like our inventory, relate to industry averages? Are we close? Are we higher? Are we lower? What does that mean? And then who are we selling to? And how does that affect these metrics? If we're selling to the right customers, we should see an increase in sales. If we're marketing to the right customers, hopefully we're seeing an increase in sales, which will then hopefully drive a gross margin increase, which is really, really important. So let me now kick it back to Andrea so she can talk a little bit more in depth about using these key metrics.
Thanks, Sam. When we talk about metrics, sometimes we get a little pushback from people who are strong business owners who've been in the industry for a long time. They say, look, I know what's going on in my business. I've been making good decisions for decades. My business is successful. And I say, that's great. That's fabulous. You should absolutely keep using your deep experience and knowledge of the industry. You should not discard those in favor of metrics, but you can combine them. You can take all that instinct, all that knowledge, and just take a look at the numbers, right? Just take a look at some of these metrics, because you'll get some surprising insight when you look at what the numbers tell you, as well as what your gut instinct and your personal observations tell you, because you can't be everywhere. You can't know everything. If your business is successful, at some point, it's too much for one person's brain to hold, right? It's just too much going on. It's too intricate. It's gotten too big. It's expanding too fast. And metrics are a shortcut, right? They're a way to get a quick insight into what's going on in the business to supplement your knowledge, your personal knowledge of it. So let me give you a quick example. And this is why consultants look at data, right? So a moving company came to me. They were struggling. They had an investor. It was a pretty new company, 3 years old. They had an investor, and the investor was getting frustrated. It felt like they weren't getting ahead, that they were always just kind of, and it's a seasonal business, right? So they have a busy season, a very slow season in the winter. So I took a look at their numbers before meeting with them. It was a free consultation. They sent me 3 years of profit and loss month by month. Now, when Sam talks about looking at trajectory or trend over time, that's exactly what this was useful for. All I had was the profit and loss, but I could look at the seasonal patterns for each year for 3 years. And I could notice what changed each year. So for example, I noticed in the second year, they injected a lot of money into marketing. Did I see an increase in sales after that? No, I did not. And they had not looked at that, right? They gave me the profit and loss, but they hadn't been studying it and trying to understand the stories it was telling. So I said to them, look, last year you put a lot of money into marketing. I don't see additional sales from that. That's a problem, right? You invest money, you need a return on that. And they were like, oh, that's true. Wow. Then we talked about labor cost, which they, rightfully wanted to well compensate their employees, but they were way above industry averages, which is another thing Sam mentioned. You've got to compete in the market, right? And you have an upper ceiling on what people are willing to pay for moving services. So you do have to manage your costs. And they were not stepping back, like Sam said, taking a couple hours each week to step back and look at what was going on overall with the business. They were so busy scheduling the crews and making sure the customers are getting good service, which is all very important, but they were never stepping back. So in the third year, although they hadn't been making a profit, they decided to invest money in buying 2 more trucks, not renting, not leasing. They bought 2 more trucks. But then they ran into the other problem that Sam has mentioned several times, which kills a lot of businesses, which is cash flow. Suddenly they're paying the notes on these trucks and they're not profitable. And so they were in a busy season. They felt like they were raking in money, but the winter was coming, right? And it really was a problem. So, this year, it's really a question whether they're going to survive this coming winter. They're really thinking about kind of wrapping it up in the fall because they're not seeing a way that they're going to turn this around and make it profitable in such a short time period. They waited too late to get some advice about how to sort of fine-tune the business model of this business and make it profitable. So I would say take a look at metrics, use it along with your personal observations and knowledge, and keep an eye over time. Compare year over year, month over month, season over season, and look at the pattern. As Sam said, you should be seeing your revenues go up. You should be seeing your profit margins increase a larger percent of net profit each year if you're running more and more efficiently and you're scaling up. So, take a look at those things. And if the indicators are going the wrong direction, take a look at why. And if you need to get some help, get some help. So let me pass it back to Sam to kind of revisit again our roadmap.
Great. So we've come through 2 of the really, really important areas. And then what we want to touch on now is a little bit more of the long-term planning and how you can use these first 2 areas of the emergency action plan and these operational reviews to really drive the long-term profitability and growth of your company. So one of the things that we talked about right at the beginning is that setting up a good business continuity plan is not just good for right now, but it's also good for that ultimate exit of the owner and transfer of the ownership. And this is really important. It's important to the purchasing co-ops because you don't want to have a member have to shut down because they didn't know what to do with their business. And so what we want to do here is we want to help you talk to your members about the importance of not just taking the planning for what happens if there's a flood or a tornado, but let's make the entire operation stronger over time. Because doing this type of longer term planning now makes the business more efficient, it makes it easier to run, makes it more profitable, and then upon exit, it's going to allow for that trifecta, which is it's more valuable, so it's good for the exiting owner. It's running more turnkey, and it's ready for a new owner to come in and take the reins without suffering, and the customers will continue to get a high level of service. So think about ways that your members may need to do some more long-term planning and reach out to folks. This is where education is really important. Andrew and I are always happy to come and talk to anybody or any group of people about this type of planning, because if it becomes part of your members' operations, if it becomes a culture within their business, it's going to be much easier for them to see the results of some of this planning work that we're talking about today. So let's now jump into our final priority here, which is this stuff has to be reviewed. We have to make this a part of our members' culture so that their planning is tucked in and becomes a part of their ongoing work. And this is where it becomes really important, as we've said throughout this presentation. Stick the head above the clouds. Encourage your member owners to stick their heads above the operations and start to look at the whole picture. How does the cash flow affect our inventory? And how does what's going on in our financing affect our cash flow? And how do who we're selling to affect what we're doing on the revenue side? All of this is at the strategic level. And this is a really important discussion because environments change. And no matter what your business continuity plan was, it needs to be updated. And it needs to be updated either once a year or at least looked at once a year, but definitely needs to be looked at and potentially updated if there's a material event, if there's a disability, if something happens to one of the owners. So these are really important planning items. And this is where folks like Andrew and I can be helpful, because The work we do at Stratus, we can come in and do an initial valuation and say, okay, here's what the business is worth. Based on your situation, we may need to grow that by 20, 30% so that you can exit and be comfortable in your personal life. Now, how are we going to do that? And that's where Andrea comes in. And she can look and I can say, look, Andrea, I think these are 3 areas that are really important for this business to prioritize to improve their value. And she can say, that's great, Sam, because now not only are we making the business more valuable, but we're going to make it function better. And we're going to increase its revenues and profits. We get those predictable revenues and predictable cash flows. That leads to more predictable growth. More predictable growth leads to a higher value of your firm. So think about what you are providing for your members in this business continuity plan space as a checkup. We all go to the doctor every year, even if nothing's wrong, just to make sure, just to check in, to get those guideposts along the way. So let's make sure that we are communicating this to our members, because as you'll see in this next cartoon, what we don't want to have happen is for somebody to go, oh yeah, I did make a business continuity plan, but man, when I tried to use it, it was totally useless. And let's think about the current scenario, which is COVID. If you made your business continuity plan 2, 3, 4 years ago, could you have predicted a global pandemic? I doubt it. So update. We've got to update this over time because conditions will change. And the last thing we want is to try to pull that business continuity plan off the shelf and it's worthless to us. So again, let's review. What are the steps? What are the steps that we would like to do to create a good business continuity plan for your members? Cash flow analysis. Cash is king. Let's make sure that we are in a strong position. And if we are not, let's make sure that we know far enough ahead of time so that we can make some adjustments. Then let's do that brainstorming. Let's determine those risks. Let's figure out whether they're high or low impact or likely to occur or not. And then figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to make some of these operational planning decisions ongoing so that we are reviewing things over time. Because ultimately what Andrew and I want to provide to you is the ability to make your members stronger, because stronger members grow their business. They have need for more services. They have need for more goods. They also are able to transition very well from one owner to the next. And that means that the purchasing co-op's stronger. It's got greater purchasing power and it's not losing members. And that's ultimately what we want to see for you and for your members. So let's now talk about a few things that we can do to help you. Please feel free to use our resources. If you have not come by and visited us at the booth, do it. If you want to engage with us now, use the Q&A function, use the chat function. We're here to help. We will offer our time because we want you to be able to provide the right resources to your members. So feel free to use any of these links from Stratus, and I'm going to pass it to Andrea because I know she has some other resources for you all.
Absolutely. I think the most important resource, as Sam said, is we're happy to give of our time. We're happy to talk to you. There's a free consultation on my website. Don't hesitate to use that. You can get some free advice and put yourself maybe in a slightly better position, just knowing a little bit more, having some ideas of things you can do in the future. So there's plenty of stuff on my website. I also put a couple of government links in there that can be helpful in terms of lists of risks to consider, that type of thing. So feel free to explore those things. And then I think the most important thing really is we're here in person right now to chat with you, to answer your questions. So we hope that you'll stay and talk to us. And we're very excited to interact with you a little bit, even virtually.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to NCBA for having us. And as a proud associate member of Stratus, is always happy to help anybody in the co-op space. And Andrew feels the same way. So please feel free, whether it's now, whether it's later in the week or a couple months down the line, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help.
Thanks.
Hey, Liz, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me. Thank you so
Now
much.
again.
I'm so sorry, guys. I just wanted to say, thanks again for joining us today. You've been here watching a rebroadcast of the Stratus Wealth Advisors presentation from our Co-op Impact Conference last month. We're thrilled to be able to rebroadcast that to you today. And we're going to switch to the live portion of our program. Sam and Andrea are here on camera with me. Thank you guys so much. So we're eager to get to you guys' questions, but we do want to kick off this live portion with just a quick poll. So I'm going to launch that right now. And you should see that pop up. So we'll give folks just a couple seconds to make their selection there. And this is really just to give Sam and Andrea a better sense of who all is in our audience today. And we've got about 40% of folks here who voted. So I'll give it a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds rather. Looking like so far, most of our attendees are from cooperatives or consultants and B2B service providers. Okay, all right, and pretty much everyone has voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And Sam and Andrea, can you guys see those results, or do you need me to read those off?
Could you read them off? Oh, there they go.
There they go. All right, great.
Excellent. Great, that's very helpful.
Okay. Now we're going to switch over to our PowerPoint. Bear with me 1 minute.
Yeah, no worries, Liz. And we just have a couple quick slides to let you guys know a little bit about some of the educational opportunities that we have. So Andrew, fire away.
So as Sam said, and as we said repeatedly throughout the recorded presentation, we really are happy to provide any kind of educational need that you or your cooperative might have. So we do small group workshops where that's a little more intensive and interactive. We can do larger webinars focused on whatever industry or special group need there is. And we're happy to do even conference panels. We can be moderators and help bring in multiple perspectives to help the audience really understand the topic. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any thought of any kind of educational offering for any group that you're part of.
Liz, can we go to the next slide, please? Great. So we just wanted to show you one way that you can interact with us and we can provide some education. Here's a link where I know that Liz has put it in the chat box. Feel free to use it. If you're a co-op, if you're a business, you can use it with your leadership team, use it with your member. This is open for anybody at NCBA. And basically, this is a workshop that we have run many times. It requires a couple pieces of financial information, 18 qualitative questions that really don't dig too deep into the business, but can give us a really good idea of what is going on operationally and get back to those 3 Ps that we talked about in the presentation. You have to create those predictable profits and predictable growth before you can get to the valuation piece, because the valuation piece is driven off of that cash flow. So next slide, please, Liz. So if you go through this, you will get a 3-page report, and that report is highlighted here. You're going to get a look, and this is from one of our clients in the lumber building materials space, but it will give you, and this isn't a valuation, right? This is just an idea based on the industry you're in and the data in the program of where your enterprise value is now and where it could be, and then what are those bottlenecks? What are some of those things that are holding back the growth that somebody like Andrea can really work with you to streamline? And maybe it's operations, maybe it's sales and marketing, right? So this can be a really good starting point. And one thing that we encourage you to do if you're a business, or even if you're a co-op, is have multiple people fill this out from the same organization, because it really does start good conversations. So next slide, please. And again, this you saw this on the recording. This is just ways to engage with us we're happy to provide resources to you. And Stratus, we've got some worksheets you can download. We also will do complimentary consultations, and anything on our blog, feel free to use it. And Andrea, I know you have a couple things too.
Exactly. I think, as Sam just said, our complimentary consultations, I think, are probably the most valuable thing you could access, and please don't hesitate to take advantage of those. And then I put a couple of other links up there that might be useful as you think about this whole continuity planning topic. So please feel free to reach out to both of us.
Cool. All right, well, great. Well, we'll take it to the next slide, Liz, which is just our contact information for you guys to take down, and we'll turn it over for Q&A.
Great, thank you guys both so much. Okay, so we do have a few minutes left today to get to some of your questions. Definitely keep typing those in the chat box as we start getting to them here. We have about a little less than 10 minutes for a live Q&A session. So the first question is, what is the biggest concern that you are hearing from the business owners that you interact with?
Yeah, so I'll take a crack at it and then pass it to Andrea. So we work with business owners in some very specific industries, some of which have done very well. I mentioned lumber, building materials. For folks like that, it's really about how do you create some sustainable growth. If you're an essential business, this has been a fantastic year. But how do you keep that going in 2021? When there's a vaccine and people have more places to put their dollars, how do you keep them at your business? So that's a big concern for the folks in the businesses that have done well. On the flip side, I would say is cash flow, right? As we said in the presentation, it's the lifeblood of the business, trying to figure out how to keep that business afloat long enough so that the entire economy and the health of the country will pick up again has been one of the major concerns. So Andrea, I'll pass it to you.
So I second what you said. And I also think everybody's heard about this whole idea of pivoting. I won't beat that word into the ground, but it is true. The strategic thinking that Sam talked about in the presentation is really crucial here, right? Thinking about new ways to reach your existing customers or new customers that you could fill the needs of. There are people out there with needs. So businesses that are struggling, I think this is a great time, and you already know this, so please don't say, I understand that you've been thinking hard about this for the past several months, but I think one thing that I've really noticed with businesses right now, whether they're doing super well, like I've got a landscaping company, they're doing great, or whether they're really struggling, like event spaces or that type of thing, the commonality is realizing that we are not going to reach a predictable, stable setting anytime soon. Right? Like hopefully we'll get the vaccine, hopefully COVID will someday be a memory, but it's going to be a while, right? Things are not going to really settle into stability for a while. And so what I see business owners doing now, just in the past month or two, is really saying, okay, the known is that it's unknown. So let's move forward. Let's stop waiting for stability and let's move forward. And in that kind of environment, I think the information we presented here and what we both do is really true, that we want to really start planning for the future and really be aware that things are going to change. So think about where you can plan resilience in, what risks are you facing, what might happen, and make sure that you've thought about it in advance a little bit so that even though it's unpredictable, at least you've got a few scenarios that you've thought through and they're not blindsiding you. So back to you.
Great. So Sam, you mentioned cash flow briefly, and one of our attendees here is asking if that cash flow template that was in your recorded presentation is available somewhere for download.
Yes, excellent question. It is. It's actually on our website. If you want, I can send you a quick link here, Liz, and you can put it into the chat box, and that should take people to the blog post on our website, and they should be able to download that and also the activities and services analysis template. So I will find that while we go on to the next question.
Excellent. Okay, so the next question is, what are the top 1 to 2 goals that you are focusing on with your current business owner clients?
Yeah, Andrea, I'll let you kick that one off while I find this link.
Absolutely. So, a lot of the business owners I'm working with are people who were fairly successful before COVID hit, and now either they're experiencing incredibly rapid growth, So we're working on stabilizing the company and building the capacity to serve those new customers, or they're finding themselves kind of teetering, like it's not really growing, it's not really losing, they're kind of in the middle. And what's going on is it used to be easier. We used to be able to be a little sloppy in our businesses, right? Like we got some leads, we didn't have, handle all of them. We didn't convert them all to sales. That was okay because we had enough sales. Now things are tighter. So we really have to kind of tighten up everything from marketing, sales, delivery to all aspects of our business, really. And so those are some of the biggest goals that I'm working on with my clients, is tightening up operations to make the most of what you have in the way of resources and turn that into profit in a sustainable way, keep your employees engaged, take care of everybody in the business and move forward. Any comments, Sam?
Yeah, I think that's great, and I would just add that from my end, it's very similar, and really it's getting people out of the scramble mode, right? The crisis mode, and having them start to think a little bit more long term, because eventually this will go away, and you want to be in a position where you're ready to run then, as opposed to, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted, what do I do now? And so that's really where the planning comes in.
Excellent, thank you guys. So we have time for about one more question here. And this one is on ROI for marketing. And the question is, do you suggest benchmarks and budgeting mechanisms to optimize marketing efforts and their outcomes?
Yeah,
good question. Andrea, I'll let you take this one first.
I absolutely suggest that. I think a lot of people, again, maybe in the pre-COVID world under less pressure, we're taking more of a scattershot approach to marketing. And right now you really have to think about, we want to invest and we want to get a certain return on investment. So having clear goals for your marketing program, and then testing, right? Try some of the marketing, see if you get the result you were hoping for, have those metrics, figure out, was it successful? If it was, do more of it. If it wasn't, tweak it, try something slightly different. So being very planful and thinking of investing those marketing dollars with the idea for a return, I think is extremely important. So definitely, good question.
Yeah, and I'll just add that working with somebody like Andrea is really important, because when it gets to the valuation piece and when you're thinking about transition planning, nobody is going to pay you for something that they have to put in place. So if you haven't proven that you have a marketing plan that works and gets a good ROI, I'm not gonna add that to the value that I'm paying you, because I'm gonna have to invest in it myself. So do it now, make your business easier and more fun to run, and it will be more profitable at the same time.
Yeah, I really second that. Sam and I were talking yesterday about that we were talking about a customer that is tired and doesn't really want to embrace this brave new world of digital marketing, which is almost a requirement now, and is thinking of exiting in a year or two. Well, if you don't embrace it now, you're going to be behind the curve because your competitors are embracing it now, right? So even if you're thinking about exiting sometime in the near to medium future, address these issues now. You can get help. You can outsource a lot of this, but you really do need to keep up on the marketing and see what's making a difference, and tighten up your operations now. Even if you're tired, get some help and get it done, because in the end, when you do exit, it's going to be a much better picture. Sam is going to be able to get a better valuation, get it on the market, and get a much better price for you, right?
That's great advice. Okay, we are at time. So I want to thank you both very much for your time today. This was a great discussion, great presentation. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us. Thank you for your great questions and for your participation. I do want to quickly note that this webinar was recorded, so keep an eye out in your inbox for that recording coming along tomorrow. And we'll also go ahead and attach those handouts that Sam and Andrea made available during this presentation, and the other links that we've been putting in the chat box, just so that you have all that information together and easy to access. And with that, I'm going to say good afternoon to everyone. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.